Hello and welcome to At Issue. I'm H. Wayne Wilson. Thank you so much for joining us for a half-hour conversation of the political status of Springfield. With the impeachment proceedings going on in the House of Representatives in Springfield right now, we're going to be talking to three legislators about the situation revolving around Governor Rod Blagojevich and what is next for the state of Illinois. And to help us with that discussion, here is Senator Dave Koehler, who is a Democrat representing the region. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, H.
Dave Leitch is a representative, a Republican out of Peoria. Thank you for being here.
Great to be with you again.
And Dale Reisinger is a Republican senator. Thank you so much for being here.
It's good to be here.
Before we talk about the situation in Springfield, let's talk about who is supposed to be the transportation secretary. It appears, as we're recording this on Thursday afternoon, it appears that tomorrow, Friday, that LaHood will be appointed as the transportation secretary. Your initial response to that selection?
Well, I think it was a good move. Obama said all along that he wanted to have a bipartisan cabinet, and LaHood was a good selection in that.
As a former Illinois Department of Transportation employee, what are your thoughts on what that might mean for the state?
Well, I'm excited about it because I think that LaHood certainly knows the issues of the state of Illinois, the concerns. His will be an administrative position over all of that, but certainly it can't help but put some light on the needs of the state of Illinois. So I'm very excited about that.
And this will include roads, railroads, mass transit.
It's a very high honor, both for Ray and for the community. I think we all should celebrate the fact that this is going to happen because it speaks well of what the country thinks of Ray and what we all think of Ray.
And as far as recollection, the first time a Peorian has ever, if he's appointed, as expected, that we'll have a cabinet position person from Peoria. We had John Block, Agriculture Secretary from Galesburg. We had Ed Madigan from Lincoln. But those are the closest to Peoria. So, so congratulations to Ray LaHood. Let's move to some news that I'm sure the three of you would prefer not to be discussing if you had your choice, but nonetheless it is here. The charges by U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald against the governor have brought some poor reputation to Illinois politics. Is that deserved?
Well, if you look at our history, I guess it is somewhat because we don't have a real good track record. And I think that that's too bad because there's a lot of good people in public service in Illinois.
Do you sometimes find that there's this broad blanket cast on all politicians in Illinois right now, especially from a national perspective?
Well, I would say there is, but I would say in many respects it's well-deserved. I mean, as far as Peter Fitzgerald's announcement, my reaction was it's about time because I've always felt these were by far and away the most corrupt people running the government I'd ever seen before. So I'm happy it's underway, and the sooner he's gone, the better.
There are those who would suggest that maybe Mr. Fitzgerald moved a little too quickly, including Ed Jensen, the attorney for Blagojevich, in that he says, well, this is just conversation. It's just people on the phone chatting. He said there was no exchange of money, there were no promises made. Is that what this is all about? Is that Fitzgerald moved too early?
Well, I think Fitzgerald realized that he had to move quickly before the governor appointed somebody to the Senate seat, and I think that was very legitimate. And there's the conspiracy to commit a crime, and that is a crime, and then there's the actual following through. And I think what Fitzgerald has said is now that they've filed those charges of the conspiracy, the mail fraud, and so forth, they're going to move ahead with the investigation and see if any of that has been carried out. But even the first part is a crime. Now, what we're going to be looking at is not necessarily whether he committed a crime or not. We're going to look at whether he is fit to lead the state of Illinois. And that's what the House impeachment is looking at, and that's what if they decide there is an impeachment, then that's what the Senate will look at.
Let's talk about the process. The impeachment actually occurs in the House, right?
The House committee investigates cause for impeachment, and if the committee passes articles of impeachment, they will be considered in the House. where it takes a simple majority or 60 votes, and then where that to pass, it goes to the Senate, and the Senate would have to have a 2/3 vote in a trial conducted by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
The committee that's in place that Barbara Flynn Curry is overseeing right now is moving, some would describe slowly. Is that intentional? They want to make sure that because there are no rules.
They want to be deliberate and they want to be fair, and they're precedent setting. So I'm sure they are being very, very careful. I think they have moved, though, very deliberately and as quickly as they could move, but now it seems that they're cautious because they don't want to interfere with the investigation that's being conducted by Peter Fitzgerald.
The situation in Springfield right now is Jensen has been quoted as saying that it's a witch hunt. Is that what this is all about, or is he just posturing?
It's theater. That's what I call it.
A lot of Springfield is theater.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, let's continue with the process. First of all, the Illinois Constitution, which is broadly based on the U.S. Constitution with regard to impeachment, doesn't have many guidelines set for what kinds of offenses do you impeach for?
Well, this is something I think that the attorneys that are in the legislature have a little bit of trouble with, because they're used to, judicial proceedings and criminal law. This has nothing to do with that. This is purely a political process. And what Representative Leitch has talked about in terms of you need a simple majority in the House to impeach, you need a 2/3 vote in the Senate to convict. It really can be for whatever reason. I'm presuming that more of what we're going to look at, rather than the criminality of this, because that's what Fitzgerald is going after. We're going to look at the issue of is the governor able to lead this state and fulfill the duties of his office? And right now, that's not happening because things are chaotic.
There are a lot of things that are happening in Springfield that may be detracting from the whole process, including Lisa Madigan, the Attorney General, files a request before the Illinois Supreme Court that was rejected as of Wednesday, that the governor was unfit. What does that mean?
Well, I think she was far-reaching in what she was looking for. I think what her basis was basically if you had a governor that was mentally ill or unfit to carry out the duties because he was incapacitated physically or for some reason. And so she was trying to reach out and pull that in. And so that was a tough one, I think, for her to pursue anyway.
But that would have been a quick solution if the Supreme Court had agreed. It would have removed him from office at least temporarily. Yeah. And then you could have moved forward. What is this doing to legislation? Because starting in January, you can submit bills. You've got bills left over from this year.
Got a lot of bills.
We've got a lot of bills, yes, because the real impact of this very bitter fight between the Speaker and the Governor resulted in what's known as the Rules Amendment, where the Speaker required virtually every bill passed in the House to include an amendment that would require rules proposed by the administration to implement those pieces of legislation to come back to the General Assembly for approval. Now, those bills were dead on arrival when they hit the Senate because Emil Jones was not going to comport with the Speaker's wish. So an entire body of legislation quite literally was wiped out in this legislative year, and is one consequence of the dispute that we've been suffering from for as long as the governor's been in office.
So let me see if I understand this. You passed a particular bill, and it still has to go to Rules Committee after that for...
Now, there were rules written into the bill. See, the governor usually makes rules, along with JCAR. JCAR actually sets the rules, and you're on JCAR.
I'm on JCAR. See, what happened was the governor was implementing programs, the big expansions of health care and family care, without an appropriation, and without the legislative authority to do it. So I'm on the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules that oversees the rulemaking to make sure that the rules propounded by the executive branch comport with the legislative authority contained in the law. So we've had very unhappy times with this administration. Typically, JCAR, as it's known, this committee is a very quiet, almost boring committee. But in the last 2 years, there have been real fireworks there as the administration, every single meeting has refused to either do rules or incomplete rules, or it's just been a mess. And so the real point developed when the governor expanded health care without any rulemaking or appropriation to pay for it. And so that resulted then in the speaker deciding that he was going to introduce this very special amendment process into the House. So we would put the amendment on in the House in order to get the bill passed. As soon as that would go to the Senate, the governor's ally, Emil Jones, would say that's not acceptable, and so it created this mess.
Well, towards the end, I will say that there was an agreement between the House and the Senate. They did a modified rule, and there were bills that came out of the Senate with that modified rule. So that at least was a start to breaking the impasse. But right now the problem is we're so focused on the impeachment process that issues like our severe financial problems are virtually going untouched.
We'll talk about finances in a minute, but with the new Senate president being John Cullerton, will that help the situation?
I think it will help the situation from the standpoint that John Cullerton has a better relationship with Speaker Madigan, and so there'll be better communication between the House and the Senate. I think there'll be a better atmosphere within the Senate of the Democrats, Republicans working together. So yeah, I think it'll be better.
You've got a new minority leader in the Senate as well. So
Right.
you've got Christine Radano and John Cullerton. It's kind of unusual to have two new leaders, within the same time frame.
What are some examples of some bills that affect Central Illinois specifically that have been caught in Springfield?
Well, one David sponsored in the Senate, and I picked up in the House, would enable Peorians to use the Public Building Commission to match for any state school construction money, rather than have Peoria taxpayers pick up the whole tab for an $84 million project. We would very much like to get some state help with that. That was an example of a bill that is caught up now, and we're going to hope in the last hours to rescue it. But that was a very critical bill of great importance to the community.
And we have an enterprise zone.
We have an enterprise zone bill over in the Kewanee to connect into Galva that is hung up right now. Actually, the governor needs to sign it, is where it's at right now. And with the chaos going on and the chief of staff resigning in the governor's office, it's hard to get anything out of there right now.
Is there any hope for a capital bill in Springfield?
Not right now until we get this immediate situation, over. Because now I think I am optimistic that at some point we will pass a capital bill this spring, because with the stimulus package coming out of the federal government, it's going to really force us, if we want to be a part of this whole plan, to have a capital bill within the state.
Because it'll be matching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hopeful too that that will happen. I think we'll have better communication. I'm very cautious though right now because, we did a lot of work before, and what we came up with was the revenue to fund it was, they were looking at the leasing of the lottery and expanding gaming. Well, the lottery basically is out now, so we're going to have to look at a different revenue source, and everybody will be for the capital program, the projects themselves. But finding the revenue and voting for the increase in revenue, that's where the real problem comes. And can we agree on, is it going to be some kind of tax on gasoline, or is it going to be an income tax increase, or just what it's going to be? All those things were kind of discarded, when we were looking before, in favor of gaming and the lottery, which, to many of us was not the right way to go to fund it to begin with, but it was the only thing on the table that people could agree with. And so it's going to be hard to find what that mechanism is and what that revenue is going to be.
But I think the key there is that we've got a lot more things on the table now. I mean, presuming that we get by our current crisis with the governor and we, see a new governor. If Pat Quinn becomes governor, all the options that were not on the table in the last 2 years could be on the table again.
Because essentially, Rod Blagojevich said no tax increases in any form.
tax
Right,
increases.
right.
Yeah.
And it was real hard then to try to come up with money to pay for a $35 billion capital improvement bill, because where were your revenue sources?
If it's fair to assess the situation in Springfield as being frozen for the time being, what happens to the backlog of bills that Dan Hines has been talking about?
I wouldn't say frozen, I'd say totally dysfunctional. State government is not functioning. Whether it's the agency or whether it's paying the bills. Right now, providers, hospitals, pharmacists, nursing homes, doctors, you name it, and other contractors, as well with the state, are owed at least $3 billion. And we've had a structural deficit of about $3 billion for the last number of years that just keeps continuing to accumulate in its size and in its scope. I would estimate that as we start this budget year, that deficit will be on the order of $5 billion, because the revenues are going down and the one-time gimmicks used to keep spending money we don't have continue to create this snowball. So this is an extraordinarily serious and difficult problem that, unfortunately, because of all this attention being paid and this diversion with the governor, we have not been able to come together on a bipartisan basis and address this very serious fundamental problem.
Well, and this is why the capital bill is so important, because this is what President-elect Obama has talked about in terms of the stimulus package. If we can begin to stimulate the economy by looking at the infrastructure improvements, roads, bridges, highways, then we can hopefully see some of our tax revenues coming up. If we don't do that, then we know we're in a downhill slide. I mean, we've got to get this economy jump-started if we have any hope of funding anything at the state level, and it goes right on down the road to counties, to local municipalities, and everybody else.
Do you share Dave Leitch's assessment that this is a dysfunctional state government? That's not encouraging at all.
Oh, well, yeah, I do agree, and I think it's been that way for a while, even before the arrest of Blagojevich. We've had a lot of things that didn't proceed because we didn't have a governor that was engaged with us. The governor, from the get-go, from the 6 years he's been governor, has not been on the floor of the Senate and lobbying for bills or talking to legislators about how things ought to go, how they ought to work. And now it's really come to a head with the impeachment committees being formed and looking at impeachment. So you're seeing the governor's staff, those that are left, very nervous, very cautious about anything they do. So yeah, I agree with that assessment.
See, one of the problems is this governor totally centralized what the agencies did. He concentrated all the power that would normally be administered through the major agencies in his own office. So even the heads of these important departments and agencies couldn't make any important decisions. They couldn't even pass rules onto JCAR in the process until they had been reviewed in the governor's office. So with that concentration of power, since now the governor is out of commission, everything just falls apart. And it's been that way, but now it's at an emergency point, because even the most basic things are not functioning in the agencies. and it's a dire situation. And the sooner the governor is gone and we can clean this mess up, the better.
Any idea at all as to when this might be resolved? And I take it from listening to you that resolution is removal of Rod Blagojevich from office.
Absolutely.
Is there any estimate? I mean, we can't appoint a U.S. senator. We can't
Right.
get bills paid.
I think it's going to take several months, and it will be the front burner issue of the legislature as we get back, and begin a new General Assembly in January. But I think it's going to take a little longer than people had hoped because, as was mentioned before, this is precedent setting because there is no other like situation that we have to go on. So whatever we do in this coming spring is going to be the rules by which future politicians will be dealt with. So it's everybody is being very careful that we do it right.
And the sad part of all this is we get calls daily about people that are working for pharmacies, healthcare, whatever, not getting paid by the state of Illinois. And while impeachment, the governor, everything's important, if your job is on the line, if your livelihood's on the line because you're not receiving the monies for a job that you've already done, that's the most important thing to you. And at some point, we have to address that, even though we have to deal with this other issue.
Mm-hmm. I mean, fortunately, the short-term bonding will take place because Lisa Madigan did certify to the bond houses that, to their satisfaction, that this was okay to go ahead and do. I mean, that was a crisis point, just last week because if we couldn't float short-term bonds to pay some of the most immediate bills, then we were really in trouble. And because of the political crisis, our bond rating was being challenged.
You would have been down to junk bond status, essentially.
Could have been.
Let's talk about Pat Quinn. Assuming that Mr. Blagojevich is removed from office, Pat Quinn would move into the governor's position. How will Springfield operation change because of that?
Well, first of all, there'll be some relief the fact that the trust factor is a big deal with the governor Blagojevich right now. He's not trusted by anybody to follow up on what he says. That will change with Pat Quinn. May have a different view on how we look at things, but I think there is a lot more trust with the governor than that. That being said, you got to understand that the directors and everything was put in by Blagojevich. These are Blagojevich's people. Pat Quinn hasn't been a part of that administration that much. He's been on the outside. Mm-hmm. So things aren't going to change drastically right away. It takes a while for that to happen.
But Pat Quinn is a very personable man. I mean, he's a good friend of mine, and I think he'll be a breath of fresh air. He's already indicated that he would review all the recent decisions to closing the parks, the historical sites, even relooking at the Pontiac prison issue. So he's going to come in with very fresh ideas and with a whole new approach.
But he's a Democrat in name, but he doesn't necessarily fit in with a lot of the Democrats.
No, he's very independent-minded. Mm-hmm. He led the cutback amendment, which reduced the size of the House by a third back in the late 70s, implemented in the early 80s. And he was a founder of the Citizens Utility Board. So he's very much an activist, independent-minded person. I agree with David. He's a very friendly person. He's a very agreeable person. But I'm amused to think of him working with a Chicago machine. It's going to be an interesting dimension to what we're doing.
He will cause some challenges with everybody across the board. Let's put it that way. But Pat is I don't think that with Pat you can ever doubt that he's sincere and honest in his approach, and I think that's what's needed.
That's right.
What do you see for the spring legislative session for Central Illinois?
What do I see? Well,
or at least hope for.
Well, I certainly hope we can get a capital bill. I think capital bill is very important right now. You're hearing it on the national scene, but it's important for us to move forward to put people back to work. I think jobs are very important right now. You just recently have heard where Caterpillar is shutting down some lines to get production in line, but Caterpillar is very cautious in their approach right now because of what's going on in other aspects. We need to get this state working again, and we can do that by passing a capital program. So we need to get that done.
Capital bill, the most important. Agreed. Okay. And with that, we are.
Well, I think we have to get this budget that was passed this year was $2.5 billion.
So you're short.
Balance.
You're short funds right now.
Just the operating budget. So we have got to get the financial position and situation in the state under control.
And the capital bill works with that. I mean, the budget crisis that we have in getting people back to work, those are just different sides of the same issue.
Now I'm out of time.
Okay.
The director says we've got to go. Dave Koehler, Senator, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Representative Dave Leitch, thank you. And Senator Dale Reisinger, thank you all three for being on At Issue. We appreciate it. And we'll be taking a couple of weeks off for the Christmas holidays. We'll be back in January with a look at the economy during the whole month of January. So join us then for At Issue.